how many units do you need to make it worthwhile to outsource or to stay? Okay, we get a variation of our typical break-even equation. It looks like this. If I stay in, my cost is the inside variable cost. Right? If I stay in, I have my fixed cost plus the number of units times my inside variable cost. Okay? If I go out, I have some fixed costs that are left over. These are the fixed costs that I have to incur even if I go out. Right? You want to finish this for me? What else do I have to pay if I buy X units?
Outside price and units.
Outside price. Yeah. Right, so this is the equation. If you want to write it more formally, this is the equation that you set up and you solve for X. Okay? Nobody did it this way, that doesn't matter. I mean, this is just a way of formalizing how it works. But if you use different methods, I have to go through and check how you did it, and that's what it takes. But I wanted to put up the formal equation like this, and you can move it around whichever way you like. It's kind of intuitive. Basically, it's the difference between the inside cost and the variable outside price compared with the savings in fixed cost, right? If I move it around, this looks like this. Is that all right? The cost that I save, right? The cost that I save should be the same as the extra I have to pay if I go out. Yeah. So this is like the equation way of trying to solve it is two straight lines. So to figure out where they meet, and this is kind of a formal way for addressing all these outsourcing problems. You know, and it just makes it easier to see what the solution is. But everybody does this intuitively. They look at the fixed cost saved and the extra cost here, and try and balance that. Any questions on this? Yeah. Okay. So we have a couple more of these, so maybe you can just set it up. It's just easier to look at what you've done. That's all there is to it. All right, I'm going to move to today's class. We're looking at decentralized firms. Put it up.
You can say which case is next.
Well, this is opening up. Basically tell you what we're looking at. We're looking at a firm So the basic thing in this chapter, chapters 12 and 14, is looking at a firm that is broken out into many separate divisions. We'll do a more concrete example when we come to one of the problems assigned for today's class. So the basic idea is that we have a large firm, we have many divisions, each division is working for itself. So to motivate it, what we like to do is to tell each division, give it a performance measure, and tell the division to maximize the performance measure. Okay, so the basic situation is like this. Many divisions, each maximizes its own performance measure.
Excuse me, Professor, do you have
Yeah.
another copy of your printout?
Oh, surely. Mila, have you got some extra up the side? Ah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. That's somebody out. Have it back. Okay, so the basic idea, we're looking at a firm with many divisions. Each division has a performance measure. Performance. Okay. And they concentrate only on this performance measure. This is the bottom. Focus on own performance measure. The problem is that if they focus on their own performance measure, they might do things which are not good for the firm as a whole. Okay? So, problem, this might be good for division, bad for firm. So this is the basic situation we're going to be looking at, how to set up the performance measures so that each division, they tell them, this is your bottom line, this is all you have to focus on, make this measure as well as you can. Okay? But by doing that, they don't hurt the rest of the firm. Okay? So these are the 2 points, measurement of performance of a division and choosing performance measures so that the firm's interests and the division's or division manager's interests are aligned. Okay, so let's look at the typical thing. If you tell them that you get a bonus for attaining a sales target, right? Your performance measure is how much sales you get. Okay? So I just want to ask you a very simple situation. If 2 franchises of the same business that are located close to each other, can you see a downside to this? Yeah? Yeah, they see each other's customers or they badmouth, they say, look, we just heard that, you know, the cook got pneumonia or something, and, you know, you get sort of problems of each one undercutting the other. So the total sum, each division tries to go up, but the total is not equal. Okay, so that's a very simple situation to keep in the back of your mind. We are going to be looking at much more complicated situations than that. The second point I want to make is that the financial statements that we will be looking at now are disaggregated. Okay, if you look at the financial statement of a firm like HP, for example, it's got millions of products, right? Hundreds of divisions, and they're all consolidated into one financial statement. Whereas here, you have to start preparing financial statements at the product level or the division level. Okay, so they're very disaggregated, and you have to use it. So just keep that in mind. These are all very basic background points, that we are looking at financial statements independently for divisions or for products, and so on. Okay. I don't think this exhibit number is correct. I'm sorry. I forgot to look it up. I made a mental note to myself that I should correct it, but I didn't. So there will be product. We will see a lot, but the exhibit number is not correct. Okay.
What should be the numbers then?
Divisions may be evaluated as cost centers. So this is the basic issue we are going to look at in the first part of today's lecture. Divisions may be evaluated as cost centers, revenue centers, profit centers, or investment centers. Okay. So before we get going further, I'd like to ask you what kind of divisions are typically one of each, and what is the role, what is the criterion by which we decide how each one should be evaluated. Okay, so just scroll down here. Okay. So let's look at this. So first of all, let's explain what a cost center is. So this is a cost center. Their performance measure is to get that cost as low as possible. Now, the very simple way of stating it, I want you to give me a little bit more. So somebody comes and tells you your division should have as low a cost as possible. What are you going to do? Lay off, right? So we have to, this doesn't really make much sense to say just like this. Usually, okay, so to make it sensible, what is the point? What is the other side of this that you need?
Maintain functionality.
Right.
Lower the cost of
So, you want to,
efficiency.
yeah.
Sorry? Efficiency.
Efficiency, I agree, but usually how does it work? I mean, suppose you're a plant manager, right? They'll come to you and say, we want to make your cost as low as possible, but you have to maintain, say, functionality, but I want to be a little bit more specific.
Your current revenue.
Current revenue or
Productivity.
production, whatever you want to call it. Usually there is a target of production that is given to you, okay? So, given production target. Is that all right? You come in, of course, if you say, make it as low as possible, as the below is saying, you can shut it down, sell all your machines, and show zero cost, but that's no good for anybody. Okay, so you're going to have a production target, and given that production target, you are going to be evaluated on how low you can make your costs. You want to give me an example?
Counting.
Maybe for 100,000 cars.
Sorry?
Maybe like in an auto factory,
Or a factory?
million cars, maybe the food shops, back,
Okay.
$2,000 per car.
Okay, or if you want to go a little bit further down, let's say you're making the parts for a car, you know, some production facility, typically those would be a production, cost center. Okay, so a typical would be a parts manufacturer. This is a typical thing you can think of. A plant that manufactures some parts is not directly generating revenues. How much it produces depends on so many other things. So they come to you and say, produce this many parts, but keep your cost as low as possible. Okay, is that all right? Yeah? Okay. All right. What about the next step? They have something called a discretionary cost center. If you haven't read that particular paragraph in the book, it won't make, sorry,
That's like a back office.
it's like a back office. What is the difference, Michael? You want to try and see what the difference is between this?
Where I work, I hear cost center, let's say finance is cost center, resources is cost center. So not directly tied to input, it's just the cost of the thing. So like this might be, economy.
Accounting. Yeah, I agree. That's a technical thing. But what is the difference? What is the difference between the two? I mean, why don't call them both?
The accounting department isn't making parts, they're not making widgets, there's no, yeah, you can't do it per unit cost on.
You're on the right track. I just want to be a little bit more precise. What is the difficulty? You have difficulty measuring
Output.
Output, exactly. Yeah, when you have difficulty measuring the output, you have a different kind of situation. Yeah? Okay. So, the difference between a cost center and a discretionary cost center comes from the difficulty in measuring output. If you don't have difficulty measuring an output, it's a regular cost center. If you have difficulty measuring the output, you call it a discretionary cost center. And here, again, it's a little harder to decide what the functional level you want them to maintain. All right, so that takes care of those two. What about a revenue center? Typical revenue center?
Sales.
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 Sales gets to go out and make it.
Yeah, sales. Okay, just leave it at that. Okay, so what's the difference? What's the profit center? Let's just run through. What would be a profit center? So what I want to ask is, before we go to a profit center, okay, let's just think about it. Is anybody here working in a place that's measured as a profit center? Or are you all basically cost centers? Most accounting departments or accounting related departments tend to be cost centers. Alright, let me ask you, I mean, first of all, what is it measured on? That's easy, or relatively easy. Profit center would be measured on profit, right? Evaluated on profit. Okay, so let me ask you the question differently. Why shouldn't sales be a profit center? I mean, why do we say that sales is a revenue center? Why not call it a profit center? Why not measure the sales department based on the profit that they generate?
That's profit is revenue minus cost, right?
Sorry?
Your profit might be your revenue center minus your cost center, right? Just that's what the typical product line.
Okay.
You know, and revenue is just money coming in. Now, you could have a very profitable, you could have a very successful revenue center, it's not a profit center. Because you're just selling stuff at a discount, and the cost of what they're selling, they're getting great sales, but they're selling something that's, they're not making a lot of money.
I understand that. So why not make it a profit center to begin with? Why even make
Because
it a revenue center?
they have no control over the cost.
Yeah. Okay. This is the problem. They have no control of their cost, and this is the other side of it.
They
You're
could sell a
quite
million
right.
of
There is
them.
a trade-off.
They could sell a million of them, but if they're not made efficiently, it's not the sales team's fault. They're selling.
They're doing the job. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So
They
this
usually
is
give us
the.
some great terms on the product, and
So Sean, I want to follow up on that. So when would something be a profit center as opposed to a revenue center?
When it's
Okay.
when the sales force does have some sort of control over the cost.
Right. Yeah. So that's one way of thinking about it. So one is that when is a revenue center a profit center? If, for example, in a simple resale, if they buy something from somebody, they have control over the cost at which they're buying, they have control over the cost at which they're selling, then it makes sense to make them into a profit center. Yeah? But more generally, a profit center is something like, let's say, an auto division. Let's say like Toyota or something, or one of the product lines, full product lines. Saka, for example.
might be some of our revenue centers.
Right. It has control over its revenue, it has control over its costs, it has everything. And so something like a full auto division might be a profit center. Yeah? Question? Sorry. Okay.
They don't know Saturn.
Sorry?
They don't know Saturn.
They don't make Saturn
I
anymore.
know,
It's interesting that you chose the company.
That's an easy profit center to evaluate.
Let's go with Chevy.
Okay, all right.
Since they used to make that.
Yeah, I was thinking of a subline of the shed. All right.
I wrote down not Saturn in my notebook. Not Saturn. Oh my notes, I'm writing down not Saturn.
Okay, so basic idea, profit center is evaluated on profit. Typically, it's a whole division which controls both its costs and its revenue, and that's why it becomes a profit center. What about an investment center? Again, it's going to be evaluated based on,
Money you make on your investments of
that's
your
right,
assets.
and the standard name for that, ROI,
ROI.
are you okay, return on investment? Yeah. So again, what's the difference between a profit center and an investment center?
Profit center, you're selling products to generate profits. Investment, you're taking the assets and investing them to generate return.
Okay, but why not make the profit center into an investment center, or the investment center into a profit center? What's the?
The investment center controls how the money is being invested, right?
Exactly right. It goes back to the same point you made earlier about the profit center.
Okay.
You need to control the investment as well, right? There are many divisions, but the capital decisions are made by the center. Corporate headquarters decides what the capital decisions are, and the division doesn't have the right to change those decisions. Yeah? In those cases, if they don't control their investment, you should not make them into an investment center. Okay? You should make them into a profit center. But if they control both, it's reasonable to make them into an investment center. Okay? So I just want to summarize basic theme, the choice of evaluation mechanism. Manager should be evaluated only on
Elements they control.
what they, yeah. That's the single theme that runs through all this. And if you read the chapter, they give you a lot of sort of words around this, but once you think through it, it's fairly straightforward to see how this works. Okay? So our basic idea is that we evaluate the managers based on what they control. We give them an appropriate target. We tell them to do the best they can relative to this target, but we're worried that it might affect the firm as a whole. Okay, so that's going to be the theme of pretty much everything we're looking at in this lecture. I want to go to page 470, so let's take a look. Okay. So, you see this, is it? Yeah, I don't think it is bigger. All right. So we got this basic idea that they should be evaluated based on what they control. Okay. This problem takes it. This discussion takes it a little bit further. So one of the problems with allocated costs is that you can't control. Allocated costs are something that you cannot control. It goes back to a basic issue, that allocated costs are something that cannot be controlled by the division. Okay, so let's look at this. Global Electronics allocates corporate overhead to the divisions based on relative revenues. The target revenue for Latin America was 70 million, which was 14% of corporate revenues. So the corporate, so this was 14%, so the total corporate revenue was 500 million. Similarly, the target corporate cost was something, and they got allocated some amount of it. Okay? So the question becomes, when you're doing a profit center, remember the profit center, you have to look at both the revenues and the costs. The question is, how much do fixed costs interfere with the measurement in the profit center? Okay? So the question here, so what we're working with is a profit center.
So how much does fixed cost interfere with measurement of profit center? If you look at measurement of profit center. So we have two questions here, right? The first one is, should you allocate any of these fixed costs? Okay? When you measure the profit of the center, should you deduct some overhead allocation? This is one question. Second question, if you're going to do it, how should you, what kind of a charge should you have? So I want to ask you, first of all, what's the problem with this?
Control it.
Yeah? Same issue, right? You don't control what's going on in the corporate entity. They might be, having their daily office meeting in Hawaii or something, and, running up the cost, and you're going to get a share of that. Okay, so the problem with this is that this is not a cost that is controlled by the
Manager.
manager. Yeah? So in theory, you should never allocate this. But the problem is, you have to allocate it, otherwise, every division has to contribute something towards the common overhead. The other problem, let's say it's a back office, right? Suppose there is a back office in the headquarters, and you do not allocate its costs. What would the manager do?
Ramp up.
Sorry?
Spend money, be a little more cavalier with.
With the resources.
Right.
So this is the basic idea, that they can overdraw on central resources unless you charge them. Okay. But on the other hand, they don't control it. So this is a typical case where you have this problem, right? You have to charge them, but you don't want to charge them. So the question is, how do you manage that tension? Okay, so here the tension is that,
So we have this thing that the manager cannot control it, but if you don't allocate them, they might overuse these costs, and that's another problem. Okay, so what they do here, let's just go down to this part where they talk about an effective corporate allocation. So the point, this was quite a nice explanation, so that's why I didn't bother to write it out separately. Okay, so what we are talking about is that you have a dual rate method for fixed and variable costs. We did this even when we did service cost allocation, right? Fixed costs and variable costs go separate. So here are the issues, right? The actual fixed costs may be different from the targeted fixed costs. The actual variable overhead rate is different from the targeted rate. Okay. Other divisions earn revenues that differ from their targets. So I want to ask you about 3. How does this make a difference to this profit center? It doesn't matter what the other groups are.
Oh, if you're underperforming,
I'm sorry?
if you're underperforming, based on sales, then you're getting underallocated. He's overperforming, he's getting more than us.
You're getting more, sorry?
Well, I'm thinking here, right, it's based on sales by division, right?
Right,
Okay? And the underperforming division is getting hit less allocated costs.
that's exactly.
Now, he's doing better, so he's getting even more allocated costs. So
Yeah.
it might make sense to in some way evaluate him at a contribution margin level rather than the allocated costs.
A good point. That's exactly the issue I want to raise here. The problem is that they are allocating costs, and this is what people do it all the time. They are based on relative revenues. Yeah? So if some other group underperforms, you get more of the allocated costs. That's a problem. Okay? So how do you get around it? You get around it by fixing, using an ex-ante rate rather than an ex-post rate. So at the beginning, you are told what you will get of the cost. If you read this example, you will see that you are told at the beginning, you will get 15 million plus 2% of your revenue. That will be your charge. You see, this formula here depends only on your own revenue. It doesn't depend on anybody else's revenue. You see the point here? Yeah? So that way you take away this problem, and that's the big problem in this example. By making it dependent only on your own revenue, you've got rid of this issue that somebody else marking up increases your cost per bit.
But what happens if they're not gonna allocate it out completely?
If this division doesn't do well,
Yeah, like, because if they're not gonna do proportionally, right, if they're gonna base on the revenue, like, then it means
Right.
something's gonna be not allocated.
right. So let's just follow this. In the beginning, you are allocated a sales target, right? So let's just follow this very carefully. It's a good question, and that's the one that we really need to answer here. So let's just look at what happened here. Let me just write a very simple thing like this. We have, so division profit, right? Division profit. Okay, so this is what our statement looks like. Yeah, you have your division sales, you have your division cost, and you have your allocated cost. So, Vinila, I want to ask you, which one does the manager control out of these 3 in this particular example? Do they control how much sales they make?
No.
The division, let's say that it's a profit center, so you are
On
starting
cost,
off,
yeah, division of
you
cost.
control your sales, you control your costs. It's only this portion that is a problem. Okay? So what they've done very cleverly here is to give you control over your overhead allocation. Yeah? you're going to get, your overhead allocation is going to depend just on this top line, which you control. Yeah?
Yeah, but if like the whole company incur more costs than they actually have a sale, so, and it means like everybody gonna go off of the sale, so something's gonna be not allocated out completely. It's
That's
weird.
true. That, but you know, the point is that, you know, you're going to get, so you're right, that on the whole, there might be some gap in the costs that are allocated, maybe some costs are not allocated. That's exactly the point that you're making, I think. That if everybody goes under, for example, the total overhead may not be allocated to the division. Yes. Right? But if everybody goes under, that's in some sense the headquarters problem, not each division's problem. Yes, to some extent, it's not really true, but to some extent you can think of it that way. Okay? But the basic idea here is that you want to reduce it to the type of, that in the end you're being evaluated on your division profit, and to some extent you control all the line items that go into your division profit.
Because I know
Okay?
that, I know
Just,
that,
let me just finish one thing with,
Yeah.
you know. See, this 15 million, that's not going to change. Yeah, you're always going to get 15 million even if the cost of the headquarters goes up. Does that kind of answer what you're saying? What you were going to ask?
like, I'm just curious, like, when is the, because at some point that extra cost has to be somewhere else.
Right.
So if it's gonna go to the headquarter and it's gonna hit headquarter books, but
Yeah.
overall company that's,
But the overall company will get it, right? The overall company in the end is all the divisions.
because I know, like, for example, our divisions, like, they allocated costs off of the subs.
Mhm.
So how many subs each division has,
Right,
or each headquarter entity has,
right.
then they allocated divisional cost. That's why
Right.
they kind of clear this out.
Right. I understand what you're saying. You know, that is, I agree. In practice, a lot of firms do that. In the end, they will allocate 100% of cost to all the divisions. In the theory, you're not supposed to do that. That's the only difference that I'm trying to tell you, that if you follow theory very strictly, there's a problem here. Okay, in theory, you shouldn't clear out any extra costs that are left over, should only be charged to corporate headquarters. It should not be charged to the division. That, in theory, is how it should work. Yeah? Does that answer your question? Yeah. So if those costs are higher, that's corporate's fault. They did not make proper sales targets. They thought sales would be higher, and that's why it has been under-allocated. Okay? So it's really a question of being very careful about who gets the responsibility. I mean, look, but in practice, you're absolutely right that they will allocate 100% of the cost in one way or another. Okay? But the argument here is that last part of the cost. So if you go back to this, we have here, the actual costs are different from the targeted fixed costs. If that happens, the headquarter gets the blame, not the divisions.
They were inefficient.
Sorry?
The actual costs were higher.
Right.
They could think that they were inefficient.
Exactly.
But if they were lower,
They get the benefit. Yeah, exactly. So the idea of this, that again, I go back, there's only one principle in all this. You get what you can control. Okay.
But
Here,
But like, for example, so if the headquarter didn't have this cost, like, for example, if they managed proper sales, but the cost, it was just under forecasted, under budgeted, right?
right,
So what happened? Oh, then everything's gonna be allocated to the division.
Right.
Okay.
yeah. So also if this division, you know, but I mean, there is a little, okay. Anyway, so this is the whole idea, that if you go through this, that's why I thought we'll discuss this, because I thought it was a nice example, explaining clearly what you should do in theory. Don't get me wrong, I mean, this takes a bit of work, and people may not do this in practice. I mean, I think the idea of just allocating by revenue and getting rid of the all fixed costs is not uncommon at all. But what you should do here, they go through this very carefully. There are 4 things, right? Actual fixed cost may be different. Actual variable overhead is different. Other divisions earn revenues that differ from their target. And what they want to do is to eliminate the first 3 and leave only the 4th to the division, because it's a profit center. That make sense? Yeah. So that's the idea. We'll do a more longer case after we've done some numbers in a few minutes. Okay, I'm going to skip this for a minute. We'll come back to this later. I want to go through the two basic methods for measuring an investment center. Okay? So both of these, this is also for an investment center. So we're returning to our second point. The first point is what is the fair way of measuring performance. The second point is, hey, if you do it wrong, there could be some problems. Okay, so we're returning to the second point here, but it'll take some time before we get there. So we have a very simple definition of return on investment. Oh dear, I didn't write that here. So let me write, sorry. ROI is equal to net income Now, it's easy to write down. In practice, there are a million different ways of measuring both the top line and the bottom line. Okay, how do you measure what is the correct net income? How do you measure what are the total assets? I'll just go over some variables. So, let me just make a point. Many different ways of measuring these. So this is one of the problems. You go into each person is going to define it slightly differently. What is included, what is excluded in the measure of net income, what is included and excluded in the measure of assets. And there's a lot of discussion in this chapter about that. We'll go over that, but you know. I just want to say here that assets we'll use it like this. Total assets beginning of year plus total assets end of year divided by 2. Okay, this is the simplest and most common measure. You take the average of the total assets at the beginning of the year and the total assets at the end of the year. And this is, maybe I should put here also book values, since we are accountants, you know what this means. So we use book values, book value of total asset at beginning of year, book value of total asset at end of year, take the average. Why should we do this? Go from your other classes. Why should we use the average?
Because your net income happens more than
Net income is over the year, exactly right. Net income is spread over the year, so you need some average of assets spread over the years, and that's the reason. Okay, but you can be very finicky and say, I'm going to put this in, I'm going to put that out. We will see some examples as we go along, and your assignment for next class is trying to decide what belongs in here. All right. Once we have this, we can decompose. So we have it here, net income by sales, sales by assets. So it gives you multiply the two. So you have net income by sales times sales by assets. You can see the sales just cancels out. You get net income by assets, which is your ROI. This is called your margin.
And the other one is turnover.
This is called your turnover.
All right.
So this is the basic definition of ROI, net income by sales and sales by assets. One is called margin, one is called turnover. You multiply the two together, you get ROI. I want to ask you again, who is mostly responsible for this? Who is most, well, I think it's not very, it's not very clear cut, but at least in theory, who do you think, which manager, the production manager or the sales manager?
Sales.
Would be sales manager, right? They decide the margins, they decide the pricing. You would say that this belongs to the sales manager. And this belongs to the production manager. We think of sales as equal to production. Roughly speaking, if you produce efficiently, your cost will be lower. You make better use of your assets. But that's why I say this is kind of a, there are more sophisticated ways of doing it. So, this is the definition of ROI. Let me do the definition of RI, then we'll take a break. We can come back and look at some of the, do some calculations. The RI is different. Okay? The RI is looking at the net income minus the average assets times the minimum required rate of return. Okay? So what you're doing here is instead of dividing and taking a ratio, you're finding a number, you're taking net income minus a capital charge. Which is your average assets So we're taking your income, we're taking away a charge against that income, and then saying this is the residual income that the division presents. Now, the question is, what is this? Why do we do this? And that's, once we're done with that, we can take a break. First of all, does this make sense when you're evaluating the division? Yeah? If you've invested more in the division, don't you think they should be set a higher minimum target? Is that all right? The more you have invested in the division, the more will be the capital cost. As you increase your investment, your capital cost will also go up. So if you put a lot of money into the division, they are required to earn more towards this. By the way, this is supposed to be the evaluation measure. The residual income is the manager's performance measure. To read,
Average assets.
sorry. This is the average assets times the required rate of return. Like here.
ASS is
Assets.
assets, right?
Okay.
Sorry?
Average. Average
Average
assets,
assets, right, all right.
There you go. Some people.
Yeah, we know.
Wait a minute, calm down.
Been a long day.
Not the problem.
It's been a long year.
All right, so this is the average assets and the required rate of return. You have the manager's performance measure as the residual income. The question now is, where does this come from? What is that? Corporate defines it? Right. But what is it normally linked to? Interest rate? Yeah. So it could be related to your borrowing cost, right? If you borrow $1,000
Right.
and you put it into the investment, you want to beat at least your interest rate, otherwise it's not worth it.
R has to be greater than G.
Yeah, exactly. So RRR, if you like, is the basic cost of capital to headquarters. Okay, this is the cost that they have to pay to get the capital. So they tell you, unless you beat this, you're not doing a good job for us. Okay, so the required rate of return is the cost of capital, and that's how it is determined. Okay, so the minimum RRR is the cost of capital, typically the interest rate. Cost of capital to HQ. Can you think of another possibility for this?
Whack.
Sorry?
Whack. The weighted average of cost of capital.
Weighted average back, yeah, okay. You could do something like that if you want to do equity and I had one other possibility. So certainly you could do cost of capital, could be interest rate, it could be equity and interest, some kind of mixture. There's another possibility which comes from
Maybe a discount rate?
discounting. What would you, but how would you decide what your capital discount rate?
On the market expectations.
Market expectations. I was thinking of something simpler. Suppose that you have two divisions.
Other investment options?
Sorry?
Other investment options?
Yeah, opportunity cost was the other thing that I was thinking. All of this you're giving me are correct. They're related to the cost of capital. But there is another one which is not related to the cost of capital directly through financing, is the opportunity cost, right? If you can make more money in Mexico,
Elsewhere.
you might put that as the charge of capital, okay? Could be also.
Or risk-free